Good afternoon, my friends. Welcome to our New Testament challenge. Today I'm going to share with you some thoughts and reflections on the first chapter of the book of Romans. I appreciate everyone's patience and understanding as we took a break over the Christmas holidays, and now we are back on track. And we'll be going through the book of Romans before we move into Paul's other letters. So, chapter 1. One of the interesting things about Romans is whereas the other letters Paul wrote were to churches that he founded, churches either he founded or he had a very close personal relationship with. He had been to every other church. Romans was different. Romans was to a church that was founded by others, and yet Paul felt a responsibility for them as well. So he is writing this letter to people he does not know. And so he's very, very clear in laying out certain things. You can just imagine how he agonized over writing this letter and what exactly it said and how it said it and how it might be interpreted and all that fun stuff. And so the book of Romans is a good overall guide to the early church and to the life as a Christian. And so this is just, it's important to notice that. So he starts off with the salutation. He does that. Paul, a servant of Christ, called, and he wants to be very clear up front that he has been called, although he himself is a Jew, he has been called to bring the gospel to the Gentiles. Talking about the obedience of faith among all the Gentiles. But he also recognizes that the church in Rome was a mixture. So there were some Jews and some Gentiles, and a variety of different people, different backgrounds that were involved. So he does the salutation, then he goes into a prayer of thanksgiving. I thank Christ for all of you because your faith is proclaimed throughout the world. He says, we've heard about what you are, what you're doing. And I guess if you're going to instruct a church, you need to at least lift them up somewhat. And then he says, I am a debtor both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. Even though he, had a formal Jewish education, he wants to make sure that they know that he has learned from others, that has been helpful for him, and so he speaks not just to the Jewish members of the congregation, but to all, and he has the authority and the background to do so. And then he switches in verse 16. This is one of those passages that you remember a long time. For I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith, for the Jew first, and then to the Greek. Now, Jew first, not in terms of priority, but in terms of timing. They received it first because Christ came out of the Jewish background, out of the Jewish people. And so, again, they weren't more important than the Greeks, more important than the Gentiles, but they just received it first. And then the Greeks, the Gentiles. For in it is the righteousness of God. Very important phrase heard throughout Romans. Talks about the characteristics of God. In it is the righteousness of God is revealed through faith for faith. The one who is righteous will live by faith. And so righteousness and justice are repeatedly characterized God's nature in the Old Testament. And so this is important for him also in the New Testament. And so it is, as he puts it, God imparts his righteousness to sinful humanity, not by works of merit or the law, but by grace alone. Justification, may have heard this phrase, justification by faith alone, the righteousness of God by faith alone, by grace alone. And so this is important to know. And so he starts here, he said the power of the gospel is salvation. and God is able to bring his righteousness to all. That's important to know, because then, and he really jumped in at then he begins to talk about the guilt of humankind. Excuse me. And this is an interesting passage, the rest of chapter 1, because the Jews have sinned differently than the Gentiles, because the Jews had the law and the Gentiles did not. And then he goes through and he lists a number of the sins that are listed, that are talking about replacing the real with the counterfeit, a chief knockoff, if you would. And so he's saying, and he lists all of these. And there's a couple of particular things that he kind of lifts up, but he uses that as an example to basically say that sin is sin. It doesn't matter what kind of sin. There is no sin that is greater than the other, but they all sin separates us from God, in that we replace what is God-given with what is man-made, man-chosen. And in the midst of that, it pushes us away from God, and we're less able to see the true nature of creation, the true nature of God. So, chapter 1 is really deep. It's tough to think about, but he comes in, he talks to these people. He wants to make sure everybody knows he's there for the Greeks and the Jews. He wants to understand what the gospel is all about, and then he really he confronts sin head on, and again doesn't name any one sin greater than the other. He uses some examples of sin that people would understand, but any sin that we commit separates us from God. Any sin, we, as he puts it, we turn away from what is real and what is true, and follow after our own passions, and that leads us astray. So, I don't know. That's one of those. I don't know if I would preach the sermon this way, ending on a difficult note. But if we take it all in the context of Romans, we will find really Paul is as real as it gets. He doesn't sugarcoat things. He wants us to understand the depths of our depravity, so that we can understand and rejoice in the heights of God's gospel. That's good news, my friends. Hopefully this has been helpful for you. Take care, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.